Hello all. I think we have audio. AV, does it look like? Awesome. Okay. Welcome back, or welcome to your first LetPub webinar series presentation. Today we have Boost Your Citations, Maximize Impact, Readership, and Visibility of Your Publications. It's myself, Dr. Clark Holdsworth, and Dr. Averill Licciardi. If you've been here before, you've seen both of us quite a bit. You know you're in for some good content. So we're going to move right into it. I'm going to introduce myself and then bring Dr. Licciardi in for her introduction. So as I mentioned, I'm Dr. Clark Holdsworth, Senior Manager, Communications and Partnerships at LetPub. I do have an academic background, so my doctorate is in physiology from the Kansas State University, College of Veterinary Medicine. I worked primarily in the life sciences, which you're going to see when I do the Q&A and have discussions with AV. It's very apparent the background I come from, the way I discuss some of the publishing and citation information that we're going to be chatting about. My work was mostly with preclinical animal models of dysfunction. So looking at oxygen partial pressures all the way from ambient air down through the lungs, down through the microcirculation, and all the way to the very, very low PO2s and the muscle myoglobin, again, particularly in states of dysfunction.
All right, thank you, Clark, for the introduction. As many of you may know, my name is Dr. Averill Licciardi, or AV Licciardi. I'm a research communication strategist here at LetPub. Similar to Clark, I do come from an academic background, although a little bit different from his. I am in the physical sciences, specifically in geology, both for my master's as well as for my PhD. I focused on reconstructing mountain glacier change in both South America and Chile and Peru, and then up in Greenland, and then out in Colorado in the United States as well. I used a variety of different geochronological techniques, anything from sediment cores and radiocarbon dating to cosmogenic isotopes and geochemistry. And from there, I jumped over to publishing, just like Clark, and I'm very happy to be here today to discuss with you some great content about boosting your citations.
Yeah, so I just want to take care of a couple housekeeping things before you jump into your content, AV. So the first is focus on the platform we're on. A lot of you have been here before, and so I'll keep this short. But for those of you, if this is your first webinar, you can see the chat feature down below. So if you just click on that, feel free to use the chat during the session. That's totally fine. If you want to ask questions of each other or leave comments in there on material, that's actually great. But however, make sure that you're using the Q&A function. So if you look below, there's a Q&A function. You bring that up. That's where you want to start asking your questions, and you can start asking them now. I'm sure many of you came into this with some questions, so feel free to enter them at any time during this. That way you won't forget. Also, it's going to give us time to upvote. So you'll notice that you can upvote comments in there. So go ahead and click on that, particularly if it's a repeat question, very similar to the one that you want to ask. Go ahead and upvote it. You can also ask your own if it's a little bit different, but that way it pushes it to the top. When we then go through these, it makes it a lot easier for me to pick out what's the most pertinent and address those first. So of course, be sure to use that immediately. Start putting them in now so we can sort through them and use the upvote feature. In terms of a couple logistics, because you're going to see a lot of the content in here is quite valuable. People want to be able to see it again. They want to be able to share it with others. That's going to be no problem. What's going to happen is you're going to get a follow-up email within 24 hours. It's going to be automated. So you will get a follow-up email to the email you registered at. That email is going to have two things. It's going to have the link to the recording. So you're going to be able to have this available on demand to see, and you can of course share that. That's no problem. The other thing it's going to have is a link to a webinar certificate. I know that's valuable to a lot of our users, to a lot of the attendees that we have here. So you will get a webinar certificate that you can use as is, as a link. So just give it about 24 hours for that follow-up email. If you don't get the email at that time, you can go ahead and email us at info@accdon.com, and we'll make sure that you get that material. Anything I missed, AV? Yeah, I think we're good. We can get started.
All right, Clark, sounds great. All right, so I just want to give everybody a warm welcome to this month's LetPub webinar, and a thank you for returning if you are a return customer. Today's topic is increasing publication citations, so something that is very important to academics of all different fields and disciplines. So for today's outline, I'm going to start with a brief introduction, which will include some ethical considerations. So it's important to understand that while increasing your publication citations is incredibly important, there are appropriate ways to go about doing this and inappropriate ways as well. After that, I'll give you 8 expert tips on how you can increase the impact, readership, and visibility of your manuscripts. And by doing those 3 things, you will ultimately increase the number of citations that you receive. I also want to focus on things from the journal editor's perspective as part of this webinar today. Oftentimes we focus solely on the authors. So if there are any journal editors out there, this is for you, but also authors, this is for you as well. Many of you may ultimately become journal editors in the future. And there's also a lot of things that editors and authors share in terms of their goals for boosting citations. So keep with me for that portion, because you might learn some insider tips there. I'll end the webinar with some key takeaways, as we often do. And then Clark and I will have a Q&A session at the end. So as Clark mentioned, if you have any questions related to the content that is presented today, please put them into the Q&A function. And if you see a question that's already been asked by a fellow attendee, all you need to do is upvote that question, and that'll go right to the top of the list. And Clark and I will address those questions first. So, as I indicated previously, citations are an incredibly important metric for academics. And while the publishing industry is moving away from emphasizing metrics so strongly, this is something that will take a while, and we understand that some institutions and universities really do solely look at quantitative metrics or as a very important part in the evaluation of an academic's career. So it is important to still have these discussions about how you can boost those citations to help you move forward in your career. Importantly, quantitative metrics are used to evaluate things such as scholarship, so how many manuscripts you're publishing, what the impact is in terms of how many folks are citing your work. Metrics are used to aid in hiring decisions as well as funding decisions. So funders want to see that, number one, you're publishing the science that they're funding, but also that the science that you're publishing is impactful. And the way that they can identify if it is impactful is, of course, by seeing the citations you have, how many researchers you are ultimately reaching with your work, how the readership of your science is. There are some controversial components to metrics. Specifically, impact factor is one of the most prominent examples. So the impact factor is really called the journal impact factor. So this is a journal level metric. However, the impact factor has kind of become this indicator of quality and significance of a publication, and by extension, a researcher. And therefore, that's why it is a little bit controversial. So again, it's not an article level metric, it's a journal level metric. But regardless, it still remains quite prominent in the publishing industry and in a researcher's mind. With that in mind, as I've just indicated, citation practices, some can be controversial. And we know in the publishing industry that they're imperfect. And you as authors and editors should also understand this. But even though they are imperfect, they still shape how we as academics behave in terms of our publishing behavior. And again, that's why we want to have this webinar, because we do understand this, and that there's actually been some research that have identified certain factors or ways that affect how papers are cited within the scientific community. And what I want to do today is share those with you so that you can understand how to increase your citation count ethically and appropriately, we all understand that's important for authors and for journal editors. So before I jump into our 8 tips for today, I do just want to touch very briefly on those ethical considerations. So first and foremost, you don't want to game the system. And what I mean by that is try to increase your citation count in an inappropriate manner. Most importantly, if you do something like this, a very large example is too much self-citation of your own previous work. Those are sort of considered short-sighted strategies, and it can be noticed by others, it can be noticed by journals. And as a result, you can compromise the perceived quality of your actual science, but also you as a researcher, and by extension, your department and your university or institution. So this is something that you do absolutely want to avoid when you're trying to increase your impact and reach of your work. So again, it's important to avoid high levels of self-citation. Again, self-citation is something that you likely have to do and you should do as long as your work is relevant. Relevant to studies of your own, as well as relevant to the target journal that you choose to publish in. If a journal indicates that self-citation is required, so they require you to cite other articles from the journal specifically, that should not be a condition for publication. So the ethical considerations are on both sides of the table, on your side as an author, and then also on the journal editor side as well. So the question I have down here in the bottom, highlighted in orange, the question, how many citations is considered good, poor, great? Those are all tricky questions. And most importantly, they vary hugely across different scientific fields. And it's also important to understand that a citation isn't always going to be positive. If you are in a battle with another research group or something, they might be citing your work negatively. However, that's fine. That's how science gets moved forward as long as it's professional. But importantly, look into the citations themselves and see how meaningful they are. You actually might learn something about your research. For example, if you're doing a case study in a specific country or a specific geographical region, and you're seeing your case study being provided as an example in an area of the world that you never thought your research would reach, that's really exciting. That's cool. So think about or look into those citations, think about what they mean, and you'll really see how your research is impacting others. So jumping into our 8 tips for increasing your citations, boosting the impact, readership, and visibility of your work. Number 1 is that you want to cite only relevant work. Like I said, citing your work is important, but only when it is relevant to the manuscript that you are currently working on. You do not want to reference every paper that you've written simply to increase your citation count. Again, that's an unethical way to increase your citations. The number of self-citations per paper, however, is field dependent. For example, in geology, self-citation is fairly common. For example, if you're the first person to work in a certain area of the world, you're going to be building on your body of work with every new manuscript that you have. And as a result, you are going to have to cite your previous works. So again, you need to learn when it's relevant and appropriate, but you don't just want to cite all the papers that you've done, especially if they're not relevant to the current work. Along similar lines, you want to reference only other researchers' work if it's relevant as well. Referencing is an important part of academia, and it's also can be seen as a very positive thing for you. Number 1, referencing the most appropriate literature is not only ethical, but it also illustrates that you can identify the most relevant work pertinent to your manuscript. This illustrates that you have expert knowledge of the field, that you understand the previous work that's been done, and you're also doing the community a favor. You're leading the readers of your work to the correct information in their own literature reviews. You're providing them with the background knowledge that they are reading your paper to learn about. So you're really doing a good service to the community if you cite your references well. I'm going to reiterate this point again, that if coercive citation is elicited during the peer review process, whether that's by the journal editor or by the reviewers, again, this is something that's not ethical and should be avoided on both sides of the table. It is true sometimes that a reviewer may point to a reference that you have forgotten. Again, if that reference is relevant, definitely add that to your paper. However, if you cannot identify that that reference is relevant in any way, you can politely decline adding that reference to your paper. Tip number 2 is to choose your keywords and title carefully. And this might seem like this is a nuanced issue, but now that publishing is dominated a lot by technology, so computer algorithms that basically return papers that you search for based on keywords, it is incredibly important to have your keywords and title accurately reflect the work in your paper. Number 1, when you are choosing keywords, you want to select keywords that researchers in your field will recognize. And personally, I think the best way to identify paper or keywords for your paper is to ask yourself the questions, which ones did you use when you were doing your own literature review for your manuscript? When you typed into Google Scholar or to your library database or wherever you're searching for your manuscripts, when you were doing your own research to get background for your paper, what were the phrases that you used? those phrases are probably going to be very similar, if not the same, as the ones that you use for your current manuscript. We also indicate that you want to use single words or terms, or maybe even short phrases. So short, concise keywords and phrases, not sentences for your keywords. And in terms of your title, keep them succinct. And sometimes punctuation can play an important part in kind of the technology search. So best to keep your punctuation if you use anything very minimal. So 1 colon, for example, you don't want your title to be a full sentence. As I've indicated, search engines focus on keywords, article titles, and abstracts. So if you repeat certain keywords in your title and your abstract, not excessively, but appropriately, that can help push your paper to the top of the search engine list. And again, this is important because the more discoverable your work is, the more people are going to be able to find it, read it, and ultimately cite it. In terms of keywords, there are some journals that have very specific guidelines for how keywords should be chosen. Some journals also have specific requirements, not only on the number of keywords, but perhaps a specific list that you have to choose from. So always check the journal guidelines before identifying your keywords and your title as well. It's also very important to ensure that your personal information is correct. And this might seem like an afterthought, not super important, but again, because all of our information for our manuscripts are put into these online databases, it's important to be consistent throughout all of these databases, specifically in terms of your name. If you are consistent among how you present your name in all of your publications, it makes it much easier for others to find all of your published work and data. And this can be as simple as including a middle initial in your name, abbreviating the first letter of your name and only having your last name or your surname be there. All of this is going to be, it can be confusing and it can cause people to miss certain papers if everything is not consistent. So always ensure that you double check that your name as well as your current academic affiliation are correct in your final proofs. This is your responsibility as an author. This is not the journal's responsibility. So if your publication has an incorrect name, it will become incorrect in all of the online databases, and that can only hinder people from finding your work, not promote it. To kind of remedy any sort of issues like this, there are research identifiers out there. I think the most common one is known as ORCID, which is an acronym for Open Researcher and Contributor ID. So if you have an ORCID ID, this is something that is free and is highly encouraged. This allows you to link all of your publications to your publishing name. And the great thing about this is that you can have multiple versions of your publishing name. So again, if you've published papers under different initials, you can list those as different publishing names and your ORCID will collect them all together. For individuals who have gotten married, I am one of these people. I publish under my maiden name, so not my married name. So I need to make sure that both my married name and my maiden name are associated with the same ORCID ID so that all of my publications can be found by others. ORCID is also very handy because you can simply put it in your email signature or on your personal website or any other social media. And anybody that has access to that information about you has a direct link to all of your publications. So every email that you send, you can have your ORCID ID at the base, and anyone who's interested in your research will have a link right there to all of your papers. And again, you're promoting your work and making it more visible simply by just having an ORCID ID. Step number 4 is to make your manuscripts as easily accessible as possible. And what I mean by this is as easily accessible to the scientific community, as well as the public or the industry, or whatever communities you hope to reach with your work. One of the primary ways that you can accomplish this is to consider publishing open access. Again, if you publish in a journal that's subscription-based, that limits who can access your papers to those that subscribe to that particular journal. If you publish open access, this allows anybody, anywhere in the world that has internet access to be able to get your papers, both in the scientific community and in the general public. So open access content has the potential to reach a much wider audience and therefore achieve greater impact and potentially increase your citations simply based on its premise. Another way that you can make your work easily accessible are taking advantage of what are known as preprint servers. So preprint servers allow you to post your pre or even your post publication prints to an open source repository. Again, this allows individuals that are outside of that subscription to see your work, whether it's in pre-published form or afterwards, so that you can have a conversation with as many people as possible. Again, the more people that you reach with your work, the potential to be more impactful, increase your readership, increase that visibility, which can ultimately increase your citation count. Regarding preprint servers, you do need to make sure that posting to a preprint server is allowed by your target journal. This information can be found in the journal guidelines. So again, always check those guidelines. One other point is that there has been a little bit of research on preprint servers. It is suggested that they may garner more citations on average than those without preprints, simply because you're getting your work out early. It's in the community. People are discussing it. They know that your final version of record publication is going to come out. So it kind of sets the stage a little bit for your final manuscript. And in addition, you can get your results out early if that's something that is important to you, and you can receive additional feedback from others in addition to just the peer reviewers during the peer review process. Step number 5 is to share your data. So this could be something different from your manuscript itself. Ongoing research suggests that sharing your data can increase your citations. And simply put, this is because others will be able to cite your data and then also use your data in terms of comparisons. For me, in the work that I did, it would be amazing to be able to have people's raw data that I could plot up in my own software next to my curves about glacier change or about climate change. And I would always be directly citing that work because it would become part of a figure that I'm using for a comparison. So again, having your data be accessible is really important. You may see that there is something called FAIR data. This stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And this isn't being increasingly endorsed by scientific institutions. Funders have also begun to really encourage and sometimes even mandate data sharing practices. This might be something that you see at the end of a manuscript submission where you have to have a data availability statement. So again, data sharing is something that is highly encouraged because it can allow more researchers to compare their work with yours, ultimately leading to more citations. Number 6, in terms of our tips, is to present your work at conferences. This is a little bit different than directly increasing your citations, but this is more focused on increasing the visibility of your research and also you as a researcher. So presenting at conferences simply makes your research more visible to the academic and research communities. You want to get your research out there. You want to become on the radar as a scientist as part of your specific field. And conference presentations allow you to do that. Plus, there's something that you can put on your CV, which helps build your academic career moving forward. So only certain fields allow conference presentations to be cited. So there is a chance for a direct citation with a conference abstract, for example. Again, you need to check with your target journal on this, as not all journals allow conference presentations to be considered references. Again, though, I definitely encourage you to do this, whether it's in person or virtual. Again, this is something that's going to help with networking as well, which can lead to collaborations, future manuscripts, and more citations. Point number 7 is to actively promote your work. And this is something that in this digital age is more important than ever. As a scientist, you are highly encouraged to use social media or any kind of other media outlets to promote your science. This can be as simple as providing links to your paper when one gets published on your own social media account or perhaps on your university's account. Again, these platforms include anything from Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn to WeChat. These links, again, can be on your personal academic website, which is also something that is encouraged to have. And you can always share any sort of press release with your university university's media team, as well as your professional and scientific societies that you belong to. The university's media team might get you a more broad audience, whereas your scientific societies is going to direct your work to others that are directly in your field, and they're going to be very interested in the work that you're doing. It's also important to look to your journal to how to promote your work. Many journals have active promotion opportunities for their authors. Some journals give you what's known as a free ePrint. So if it's a subscription-based journal, you may get 50 free ePrints that you can share to whomever you wish. Again, you should do this. You should send those ePrints to individuals that you are either currently collaborating on, that you think would find your work of interest, or those that you're reaching out to potentially collaborate with, or that you simply want to know that you had this paper published. Again, the more you share your research, the more readership and visibility you have, which can ultimately lead to increasing your impact and increasing those citations. Sometimes journals also choose specific articles that they would like to promote. So if they find that your work is of particular interest in the edition that they're putting out, they may contact you and select your article and have a targeted promotion. And this might be meaning focusing, putting your manuscript on the main page of their web page. It may be promoting your work through a blog post. It may be doing an interview with you that they want to post as well. It is encouraged that you definitely take advantage of those opportunities to promote your work in as many ways as possible. And the last tip that I want to give you to boost your citations as an author is to communicate your science visually. These days, we are more visual than ever in terms of our communication, and that is something that's kind of filtering into the publishing industry. Ways that you can do this are through both video and graphical abstracts. Sometimes these are optional, and then sometimes graphical abstracts are required by your target journal. But most importantly, you can promote your work in these visual ways in a way that a traditional manuscript just wasn't able to. You can use different types of scientific illustrations or animation to illustrate these really technical concepts of your manuscript in a much more eloquent way, so that more people can understand the science that you're doing. And by doing this, you reach a much greater audience. Very importantly, any form of visual media, whether it's in video form or a scientific illustration, is a reusable communication tool. So if you decide to take advantage of visual communication services, you can not only use it to promote your current paper, but use it in a lecture or perhaps in a conference presentation, or use it in a newsletter or anything like that. This is something that can be very, very reusable. And again, this includes anything like journal covers, which are the images that I have on this slide, to infographics, and again, different types of scientific illustrations. So look into communicating your science visually. Again, this is something you can share on social media, post on your web page, something that's going to really catch the eye of your audience and showcase your science in a different way other than through manuscript form. So that's the end of my 8 tips that I have for you today, but I do want you guys to stick around because I don't always want to just focus on authors. I also want to think about journal editors, and primarily because authors and editors alike wish to increase their citations. So if you're an author in the audience right now, I just went through many ways that you can boost your citations. But if you want to jump into an editor's shoes, think you need to understand that a journal editor works for a journal, or they're in service to a journal, and journals also care about increasing their citations. They want to bring as many readers into their journals as possible, and the more readers is likely going to lead to more citations. And just in the beginning of my presentation, I indicated that impact factor is still an important metric. That is the journal level metric. So journals are always hoping to increase their impact, readership, and visibility, just like authors. So if you are a journal editor, I encourage you to also consider open access if that is an option for you. Encouraging uptake of open publishing with your authors, again, will increase the reach of your journal, increase the reach of the articles that you publish, and this could ultimately increase in citations. I do understand that open access publishing is not an option for everyone. So if you are a journal editor, perhaps you can make some papers freely available for a short time. This can be as part of your current market strategy. You can choose specific papers, whether ones that you know are highly cited or have a good following, and perhaps that can bring in more citations for you as your journal. Review articles are also a very good way to increase citations, and this is something that I also want to highlight for authors. Because reviews are often one of a journal's most read and highly cited contributions, not only as an author do you want to write review articles, because those are going to be very highly cited, but journals also want to publish them. So comprehensive and well-written reviews are very likely to attract a high number of readers and citations. So again, that's really advice for both authors and editors. As a journal editor, it's also important for you, or perhaps you as well as your other staff members, to take a step back and analyze the content in your journal. And from there, also look at journals that are within your field, so competitors perhaps. If you can identify which content is the most highly cited in your journal, that will identify current topics as well as highly cited researchers. And at that point, you can frame new issues on that, or you can invite those authors to come back and publish. As an author, you should always consider an invitation that you receive. This could be to publish in the journal, or it could be to be a guest editor or contribute to calls for papers. Again, this can all generate an influx of submissions and then ultimately more citations, both on the author and editor side. Another way to boost citations is to consider publishing in special or themed issues on current topics within your specific research field. These are really important because they're high impact topics that can attract a lot of attention and then ultimately citations. These are typically themed issues, so there's 10 to 12 manuscripts or 5 manuscripts, depending on the size of the journal, that fall under one of these special issues, and oftentimes they include a review article as well. So again, same advice to the authors. Publishing in special issues is a great way for you to increase readership and visibility, which ultimately may lead to increased citations in your work. Again, publishing in a special issue is not only an invitation sometimes, but it also connects you with a lot of other researchers that are directly in your field or adjacent to your field, complementary really to your research. So it can increase collaborations, it can increase visibility between that network, and really help you advance your career. Just like my advice for authors, my same advice for journal editors is, again, take advantage of media promotion opportunities. Citations, impact, and reach all depend on readers being able to find your journal and the articles that you publish within. So journals should promote themselves at conferences and industry events. If you are an author, you should visit certain journals' booths when you go to conferences, see the opportunities that they have, take advantage of those networking and collaboration experiences. And again, social media is key nowadays, that we are all so connected to all of our devices, but it is an excellent way for you to promote newsworthy articles and journal news from the journal editor side. And again, articles and new research that you're doing in your lab from the author's side. So with this, I do want to leave a few key takeaways before we jump into the Q&A. So again, if you've had any questions about the topic and content that we've discussed today, please input those questions into the Q&A function and then upvote them if you see a question that you would like to be addressed. Again, we welcome you to share your own personal experiences and then form those into questions as well. So again, while metrics are very important in academia and in publishing, it is understood that citation practices are known to be imperfect. So again, don't choose your journals or focus solely on quantitative metrics. Increasing your readership and visibility is equally as important, and they all kind of support one another. So again, it is encouraged to not focus solely on metrics if that is something that is possible. While I didn't heavily emphasize the fact that well-written papers are well cited, that is true. If you put forward a good indication that you've taken time on your research, that it's well thought out, that it's well written and presented, those papers are likely to be thought of as more high quality and therefore lead to more citations as well. It's very important to always thoroughly consider your keywords, title, and abstract, as these are essential, not only matching your publication with the right audience, but also getting your publication to the top of the search engine list as others are doing their literature review and putting in those keywords into their search engines. Publishing your data in an open repository is very important. Where you publish your data matters. And importantly, if you can, consider open access journals because you will reach the widest audience in that manner. Journals and publishers do vary in the way that they disseminate and promote the publications that they have in each of their journals. So if you are looking to increase the reach and visibility of your work, perhaps publish in a journal that really has strong promotion qualities, ones that strive to increase reach and really support their authors or empower their authors in that way. Again, sharing your work in a freely accessible repository is going to increase your visibility, connect you with more people and more researchers that are likely to read your work. And in doing so, preprint servers are a great way to do this, not only because it gets your results out early, but again, it shares your work with others that might not be able to do so behind a subscription paywall. So with that, I do want to thank you all for your attention today. Again, we welcome any questions, and I do just want to put a quick plug in here for our next webinar next month in October. Remember, our LetPub webinar series is 1 webinar per month. Again, always free. And please, if you have any suggestions on topics you would like to discuss, please always feel free to share those.
Thanks very much for that, AV. We do have some questions just to get started. One really good one, and we have time now, so we're close to 40 minutes in, but we'll have time to get through all these. So please, if you start having questions now, go ahead and add them to the Q&A, and we'll address them. If you can't remain around, one thing I did forget during our housekeeping was to let everybody know that we do have the Peer Ref Hub. So you can go to the Peer Ref Hub, leave comments and things for us, ask us questions over there, and we'll answer them over the next month between now and when we have our next webinar. But if you want to go today, we try to answer them rapidly today, tomorrow. Within that first week is usually when most of them get asked and addressed. So yeah, if you need to step out now, go ahead and do that, and you can still get your questions answered. Okay, so first one I have here is really good and probably the most upvotes I've ever seen on a question. Are there any metrics that show the proportion of positive versus negative citations? Because obviously you're going to have researchers that have citations, and a fair portion of those could be ones that are contrary to whatever the citing authors have found. So I am aware of some of this, but I just wanted to pose this to you first and see if you have any insight.
I actually do not have much insight on this, so I would be happy if you have background to share, because that is a really excellent question and one to consider for sure.
Yeah, and I think it is subjective. So you can easily go in and see when you look closely at your own work that's being cited, you can see if people are the way in which people are using it. So that is valuable for you. Go ahead and don't just look at your number on Google Scholar. Go ahead and look at where you're being cited, which I'm sure many of you do, because of course it's exciting to have your work cited and you want to see the context in which it's discussed. But importantly, there is a program. I actually had the opportunity to speak at SSP in the innovation session, and machine learning has been very, very big in the publishing space. And so there's a platform, Cite.ai. It's SCITE.ai. I'm actually going to go ahead and post it in the chat. So this is just a bit of machine learning software that is going to return a qualifier on statements, and it's going to be categorized into supporting, neutral, or contrasting. And I think importantly, neutral is one you consider, because we only think of positive versus negative, but what the Cite platform has found is that something like 95% of citations are neutral. They're just simply being cited. You can imagine things like in the methods and this type of thing would be a neutral citation. They're not supporting that the citation is valid or invalid. Agrees with what their findings are, because it's not always cited in relation to the findings. And so a lot of them are neutral. And so what you really want to focus on is, are yours positive? How many positive ones are you getting? So where is your work being cited in such a way that the researcher is saying, so-and-so also found something similar to this, maybe, in a different model or something like that. So you can look and see if you are getting those positive rather than neutral citations. That's really what they've found it's been about. Not so much negative. Certainly there's conflicting citations, but those account for actually quite a small proportion. And so you'd be looking to more emphasize where your citations stand out as supporting rather than neutral. So yeah, go ahead and go in there, play around with it. I believe that there's a free version. A lot of times this is being used by libraries, institutions, researchers, specifically looking into publishing and citation data. But I think the free one, you could check out your own work, right?
I think
Briefly
so.
and give
Yeah.
yourself a nice snapshot. It's also something you could like ask your department to get for everybody, you know what I mean? So you could all check in at any one time, because I think the cost for some of the lower ones, like the pro model and that type of thing, are pretty affordable. So yeah, go ahead and check that out if you're interested. But it's a great question, because that's what they talk about at these publishing conferences. You and I see all the time. They're talking about this all the time. What is a citation really worth beyond this sort of discrete value of you got one, you didn't get one, right? It's not just a accounting game. Oh, this is a nice question about when you're considering what I just said, the absolute citation count on an article. This depends quite substantially on the age of the article, right? How long it's been in circulation. What's your experience with normalizing citations for per year or some sort of citation rate? Are you familiar with any metrics that maybe some of the bigger publishers use?
Yeah, I am somewhat familiar with the normalizing metrics and indicators, although I do want to just comment on the fact that this participant is absolutely correct. Impact accrues with time. So looking at your citations, of course, you're going to get more citations the longer that your manuscript has been in circulation. And thinking about the different types of manuscripts that you can put out there is also important. Review articles, again, are going to have a big impact right away, but they're also probably going to maintain impact through time, specifically if it's on a really current topic. And then this second most cited type of publication is probably going to be an article. Again, that'll have a quick increase in citations right after it comes out. And then it will probably gradually decline over time, just because that article is something that is going to probably be built on through time in terms of citations. Newer articles that cite that one will probably eventually be cited more. If you write short things like editorials or notes, those are probably going to get a lot of citations real fast and real quick. But then that might drop off a lot faster relative to, say, review articles and original research articles that I just mentioned. So again, age is important, but the type of publication that you choose to do is also important in terms of the number of citations that you have. Clark, I guess, do you want to talk about the normalization? Sorry, I went on a little bit of a tangent there, but
no, that's fine. So yeah, there is normalization for citation year. I think most people focus on count, which again, we're trying to talk about, and I think we're going to get into a little bit more. I have several questions for you based on quality of citations and looking at subjective. So I don't really think the normalizing is commonly used, unfortunately. Most people are simply looking at like their H index and reporting those numbers and looking at that for promotion and stuff. But certainly, I think in the lab and when you are using this data to discuss tenure and promotion or show what you've done for the year, this type of thing, I think it is a big focus to focus on the short term and not the duration of any of your citations. So one thing we commonly are looking at for myself was, as soon as a paper was published, those first 3 months, that's kind of what I was really, really interested in for citations, because that also suggests readership, right? Like, are you in a journal that's getting good readership? Because if you're getting it within the first couple of months, that means people are coming there and grabbing citations immediately, not just looking up on PubMed because they need a supporting paper type situation, I think. So we would always look at that first 3 months. And I think if you don't have something in the first 3 months, it's one of those signs of maybe I should reevaluate my search strategy for like journals. Maybe this like wasn't the best venue for this. So that immediacy effect, I think, is really important, and you should definitely use that, even if you're not using you can certainly use a rate and everything, but beyond the counting data, that's another thing to use. Focus on young young
Mhm.
papers and what you're able to get in a short period of time. And I think that can be a very effective argument for you for the impact of your research. Okay, I had a couple questions for you that relates to this thing around quality of citation, AV, because
Mhm.
what we're talking about trying to boost your numbers the same way when we give presentations to journal editors, we're trying to talk to them about how to boost their impact factor and this type of thing. But what these conversations ultimately go towards is what we're really trying to do is make it so that you can accurately evaluate and promote your overall citation impact, not just your quantitative data on how many. And so what about, you talked about it a little bit, like going to conferences, right? Because then you're
Mhm.
promoting yourself and you're tying yourself to citations, and it allows you to become more impactful in your
Mhm.
field. So how important do you think that increasing author visibility is? And what do you like to see from a journal when you're like selecting a journal? You also mentioned that, like looking for journals that like promote their work well. So either of those two and how they come back to real subjective effect of like people seeing your research and using it beyond absolute citation counts.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just pretty much answered the question. I think that it is incredibly important for individual researchers to promote themselves in addition to their science. Think of yourself as like a bundle. If you are, I think it's really important to like go to conferences, make yourself known, make it known that you're working on these things. Again, a lot of us are we're concerned about being scooped, and academia is very competitive. But if you're out there, and even though you haven't published something yet, but you put your voice out there, you do a poster showing that your work is in progress, even if it's just very preliminary, it puts you on people's radar, and it makes you more visible by going to those conferences, by networking with others, by making those collaborations. And again, those are things that are going to be leading to more collaborations and likely impact down the road. A citation is simply just one absolute number. And they're probably going to be something that comes along with the collaborations and networking that you have, but promoting yourself as a scientist is incredibly important. And again, this is something that you can do with your peers. Your mentor is probably going to be someone that's going to assist you with this, or your advisor. But if you can attend as many conferences as possible and network with others, that is something that's just going to help boost your citations, but really just make your work more visible. In terms of journals, there are specific publishers and journals that very actively empower their authors that they publish. It's beneficial for them, of course, to promote the articles because it will bring in more readership for them, but it's beneficial for you as an author as well because the journal is working with you. You're not doing it all by yourself. So while a lot of journals and publishers vary in those types of practices, I encourage you to seek ones that actively promote their author's work for them. Again, this is just taking a little bit of the work off your shoulders, but is going to be ultimately helping you as well. Clark, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. So I think particularly, obviously, and you and I have talked about this, AV, in previous presentations. As a reminder, you can go to PeerRef and go to the webinars tab, and you can watch some of these old ones. But in ones where we discuss journal selection, we talk a bit about, again, readership is crucial. So you can go to professional societies and that type of thing. But I think if you're going outside of that, it is very, very important to focus on the value added post-publication promotion that a journal offers. If you're going to go to like an Elsevier or something outside of like your society publishing, a more just general journal, pick and choose, be very particular about the journal that you're going to and the value that you think they're going to provide in terms of exposure. You know the readership is going to be good at your society journals. You know you're going to get some citations simply because these are your colleagues. But yes, I would focus very much on a lot of the things that you pointed out, AV, things like the availability of video abstracts, presence on social media, these types of things. Absolutely. Yeah, so I just wanted to address that was a theme throughout. I just wanted to like have you elaborate on it a little bit because I think it's crucial and it goes into some of these other questions we have here. These are very similar. The first one is asking about self-citation, which you covered a bit. Obviously, you and I don't promote self-citation. We talked about the ethics of these types of things in presentations previously. But perhaps you can comment on what's appropriate. What are you trying to do to get value out of self-citation without veering into something that's actually going to be damaging to you? Because again, people are going to see that as, well, you have citations, but they're bad, just like the contrasting citation type situation.
Yeah, I think that a way to think about it might be what you would notice as a researcher reading another paper. So if there's a sentence and there's a lot of different papers that are cited and they're all by the same group or the same author themselves, and then you look at the reference list and 6 out of 8 of the citations support topic A, and then there's these 2 that are totally unrelated. They're not relevant, but they are by the same group. You would kind of probably, furrow your brow and be like, I wonder why they cited those. Those don't seem relevant. So if you can find that yourself, and then you might find yourself doing it, that should be something that's a big red flag for you. Like, you don't need to cite those 2 extra papers that made you kind of question why they were there, because that's something that you can recognize. So if you can recognize it, it's very, very likely that someone else is going to be able to recognize that too. And if that's the case, then those 2 papers don't need to be cited. So just make sure it is as relevant as possible. Sometimes journals kind of limit this too. Some journals have limits on the number of references, so that makes you have to really make these selective, important decisions on which references are absolutely the most crucial to supporting the literature review that you're providing and the statements that you're citing. Again, some journals do that not only because of space, but because they can recognize that self-citation is an issue within the publishing industry.
Excellent. Yeah, very good advice in terms of like towing that line, I think. One thing that I tend to think about, and the way we've helped clients, I think, with some of our editorial projects, is the way you do it as well. So the way you're citing work, there's really no reason to, when you're citing everybody else's work, just referring to the work, not really, this was found, that was found. And then going when it's yours, there's no need to bring attention to the fact that it's yours. Cite it just like it's other research in the field, right? Don't cite it like our laboratory worked on this type thing. If you're concerned, if you think you're citing a lot of your work, that's just going to make it stand out more. This is a very subjective type thing. Some people might look at something and say like, oh, that's like, they're citing their work. They're like leaders in this field. And then other times a reviewer will look at it and be like, oh, that's self-serving, that type of citation. So it's subjective anyway. And so there's things that you can do to subjectively try to avoid these types of things. Another important thing to think about is, I think if your work's already being well cited, then you citing that is a bit safer, right? Because there's already proof of concept that it's relevant. If you're citing your paper that doesn't get any citations, particularly like in the introduction things that are doing it somewhat excessively across all your papers, that might be more of a red flag that the self-citation is self-serving. In that case, you don't have this proof of concept that, yeah, other researchers are citing it. It makes sense that I would cite it too. So that's another thing you could think about when you're saying, does this one belong type situation. Okay.
Do you think we have time for one more question or so?
Yeah, I'm trying to. There's one on OA that I may just we can answer in the peer ref hub. But can you talk about special considerations for early career researchers? So any advice for early young researchers who are not well known? Also researchers, I'm sure you can think of many issues that younger researchers, particularly maybe doctoral candidates, have to deal with, or postdocs, in terms of citations and boosting their presence, or again, focusing on subjective things like, well, wow, I got cited in, a review article, something like that. What should they be focused on?
I think it's a difficult time. It's a stressful time, definitely. I mean, I remember it very well. I do think that at that point, it is very important to get your publications out. As an early career researcher, you do need to both publish, but also make a presence for yourself. In the time that I did my PhD, social media promotion of yourself as a researcher became something that was really prominent. I kind of graduated at the end when that really started to peak. For example, now all of my friends that are still in academia, everybody has their own personal research website that they use in addition to their CV when they go to conferences or they apply for jobs and things like that. That's something that I didn't initially have to have. But it was only within a few years that sort of promotion of you as a researcher and promotion of the work that you're doing in that visual way, in that social media platform became really important. Now it's something that I, again, would encourage everybody to have because I see that it's pretty mainstream. So again, it is important for you to publish. I think at that point, just getting your science out, not focusing on the quantitative metrics, is pretty critical because you want to show that you can take a research project from start to finish. So from conception to publication. And that's something that's going to be really important for search, career search teams, things like that, hiring processes and funding decisions. Not necessarily, in my opinion, citation number at that point, because more established scientists do understand that, again, time is important for impact. You're not going to have as many citations as somebody who's been in the field for 10 years because you are starting out. There's hopefully there's not that sort of bias against you or anything like that. So I would say you still got to focus on publishing, but focus a lot on going to conferences, networking, promoting yourself through different channels.
Excellent. Yeah, I'd agree completely. In particular, your point about focusing on your research and not the quantitative output, I think that's crucial. The citation for you at that time can be a very useful input to forming your research and to forming your laboratory rather than regarded as a critical output. Of course, it's an output and you are going to use it as such, but use it as much as an input. So what you're probably going to find is that you're leveraging the field you're in and the laboratories you're surrounded by. And so your sort of lineage of citations will be very overlapping with your lab and whatnot. And what I mean by using as an input is that's valuable. That's certainly going to help you being included in that sort of family of work that you've already been a part of. But you should be looking at your citation record and seeing areas in which you are diverging from that sort of lineage or citation family, because that can be valuable to demonstrate to you that your lab is becoming independent and finding its own questions that maybe have, of course, a huge overlapping readership, but also a unique or divergent readership from what you came up in and what you're leveraging from your early career. And that can be, again, a useful input and information for you on how to form your lab, form your research direction, and forge your own path into different things. It's not always just an output. It's information for you to assimilate, again, subjectively. Go in and look at the context of these citations and use that to better your research and to better your research program, rather than constantly thinking of it as just like an output, like a grade on an exam. Okay, I think we're perfect then. We're right at 60 minutes. So there's a question here. I'm going to address it. It's more just a comment on OA, and if it's problematic when you have OA journals that may not be as highly regarded. I think it's something I can put some links to in the peer ref hub. So look for it there. That's it. I just do want to have the last reminder that I always give, that you will be receiving the follow-up email. It's going to have the full on-demand recording for you. Feel free to share it with anyone. They'll just register for the on-demand recording, just like you'd register for the webinar. It's also going to have the link to the certificate of attendance here. So just give us 24 hours. If you don't get it, you can send us an email to our help email afterwards. All right. And I think that's it. As you already plugged the next webinar for us, just be on the lookout for that email so you can register for that one. And again, a reminder, I've forgotten this in previous webinars, but all the webinars are up now. So you can go to PeerRef, letpub.com. You can go to the webinars tab and you can view recordings by registering for the on-demand for all of our old webinars that cover a lot of these topics, OA, predatory journals, that type of thing. So,
all right, thank you guys all for being with us today, and have a wonderful rest of your week.
thanks, AV. Take care, everyone.